Hello and welcome to today's webinar. It's a lovely sunny day in London and I'm going to be showing you how to make this great summery bag. So this bag's going to feature two new techniques. We're going to look at some foundation paper piecing, which I've created the butterfly with, and we're also going to look at the really great Bernina Spanish hemstitch attachment, which creates this really nice lacy effect, which I've used to join these two fabrics together. It really gives it a bit of a hand look finish. So that's what we're going to be working on today. Now, I came up with this project because the other day I went for my lunch and I decided it was a lovely day, so I'd go and sit in the park. But when I got to the park, I thought, oh, I'll sit on the grass. But the thing with sitting on the grass is you never know whether you're going to get grass stains on your clothes, or you're not going to see that bit of bird poo, or it's always a bit fraught with danger. So I thought what I really need is a seat pad to sit on. So I came up with the idea of creating a really attractive bag that I could take my lunch and all my book and my sunglasses out to the park in, but then once I've taken those things out, I can reverse it and I can sit on it. So this bag is lined with an oilcloth fabric which is wiped clean. It's slightly padded so it makes it nice and comfortable, and then once I've finished having my lunch I can just pack everything away and go off again. So this is really great for taking to the park, or it's also good for taking to the beach. So this is what we're going to work on today. Okay, so the first stage is we're going to work on my foundation paper piecing. So what I did was I knew I wanted to do a butterfly design, so I drew my butterfly design out and then I turned it into a foundation paper piecing design. So I worked out all my blocks. Once I worked out my blocks, all I needed to then do was flip it for the other side, so that was quite easy. Now, when I worked out my blocks, I found that I needed to split it into 5 different sections, and then I could sew each section together to create one half of the butterfly. Then when I'd done that, I could sew the 2 main halves together to create the whole butterfly. Foundation paper piecing is a really great way to do really precise piecing. You can come up with really complicated designs that you would never be able to achieve any other way, and I found it really exciting. It's really quite addictive once you get going, because you know the options are endless. You can get really creative with your designs. So what you're doing basically is you're creating a template which you're going to stick onto the back of your fabric, and you sew along the lines in the order that's marked out, and you slowly build up your design. Now I created my designs just on normal printer paper. Now quite often people say that printer paper is a bit too thick because you have to tear it off at the end, but I didn't find it to be a problem. I was keen to get on. I didn't want to wait to buy a specialist paper, so I've used printer paper, and for me it worked well. But there are lots of other papers on the market which I think are a bit thinner and easier to tear off, so if you wanted to experiment with those, then great, go ahead. But as I say, for this I just went for the normal printer paper. So I've created my template, I've got my fabrics, so I'm ready to get sewing. So today I'm using the lovely B480, which has a nice 9mm stitch width, and this is going to be really great when I move on to the Spanish hem stitch attachment, because that's going to give me a nice wide channel. But for the foundation paper piecing, what I need to do is I need to reduce my stitch length. The standard stitch length on my Bernina 480 is 2.5 millimeters, but I want to make that slightly smaller, so I'm going to go down to 1.5. Because when I'm sewing on my my foundation paper piecing, I want to be able to rip the paper off at the end, because I don't want that to stay on there. And if you've got a nice small stitch length, that really perforates the paper and it allows it to come off much more easily. Also, you want quite a strong stitch to hold it all together, because you've got lots of little bits that are joining together and you want it to, you know, to sew together quite firmly. So that's why I've taken my stitch length down to 1.5. I'm using just a normal foot 1C, and I just have some normal, I think this is a metricine thread, so just a normal weight of sewing thread. Okay, so the first stage is to get my template and to stick my fabric, to stick it onto my fabric, just to anchor that first piece down. And I'm just going to use a little glue pen to do that. So I'm just going to pop a little dot on the back and just going to stitch that down. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I've got my little rotary cutter, And what I want to do is I want to just neaten the edge where I'm going to sew my next piece to. So to do that, I'm just going to fold it back, and I'm going to take my my ruler. So I'm just going to trim that off there. So now we've got that trimmed, and I can just fold that back. Now I'm going to sew piece 1 to piece 2, and piece 2, I can see from my diagram, is some red, my lovely red Heather Ross fabric with the little butterflies on, which I thought was very appropriate. So I'm just going to cut a piece off to sew on. Now it's always best to have a piece much larger than the area you think you need, because it just makes it so much easier when you're sewing it down. There's less room for error. So what I'm going to do is take that piece, I'm just going to lay it down along my line, and then what I like to do is I just like to test. So I just like to fold it over with my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then you can just have a look and just see whether that is going to be is going to cover the shape, which is, I'm just going to move it over just so you can then make any little adjustments that you need to make, and then you can just have a look. I think some people use light boxes as well, just to really double check, but I find I can just sort of gauge it. So once we've done that and we know it's going to fit, we're going to turn it over and we're going to take it to the machine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all the way from the edge all the way down the line to slightly over the line. So I'm going to start right at the edge and go in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just here on my line. I'm going to go back and then forwards, come all the way down, and then do a couple of stitches over my line there. This is to make sure this edge is really secure, because I'm taking those papers off at the end, and the last thing I want is it to come undone, so it needs to be nice and secure. And then I only need it to go over a couple of stitches at the end, because I'm going to be sewing another bit of fabric over here which will secure everything in place. So I'm going to take it to the machine, and we're going to start to sew. I've put my needle down on the point I want to start, and so I can just hold my threads. Now what I want to do is I want to start going backwards, so I'm just going to press my quick reverse button in, and then I'm going to just slowly sew backwards to the edge, and then I can release and come forwards, make sure that's extra secure, and then I can just sew down my line, and then when I get to the end of my section, I can just do one or two stitches, and then I might just go back one, and then that's it, and then I can trim, and that's that line done. I've sewn my first line, and we're going to move, so we've sewn 1 to 2, and now we're going to sew 2 to 3. So what I'm going to do is just turn it over, and I'm just going to flip my fabric back, and I'm just going to give it a little roll with my roller, or you could just give it a little finger press, and then we can turn the template back over. Now I'm going to fold my template down along the 2 to 3 line here, and I'm just going to trim the excess fabric that I've got. So I'm going to get my ruler, and I've got a 1/4 of an inch here. I'm just going to trim this excess bit of fabric off with my rotary cutter, so I don't need that bit anymore. So now I'm ready to attach the next piece, so which is section 3. So section 3 is quite a big piece, and looking at my my plan, I can tell that that's another pink piece of fabric, and because it's quite a big section, I'm going to cut a fairly big block. There we go, and I'm going to place it along my line which I've cut, and then I'm just going to fold back, so I've got a 1/4 of an inch roughly, fold back and just check, and I can see that's going to be ample because it's covering all of the rest of my template, so I can see that's going to be fine. So then I can just fold down, turn my template over, and I'm just going to turn it around because I want to go from the edge, and again I'm going to sew from the edge right the way down, so I've joined 2 to section 3. So once again I'm going to go backwards, forwards, and then just do a couple of stitches over the edge. So that's sewn 2 to piece 3. So once again I can just lift it up and get my roller and give it a little press, or just a finger press. Then I'm going to do 3 to 4 now. So where I've got it joining 3 to 4, I'm just going to once again bend that template over, and I'm just going to trim my excess away. Let's get a better position. Trim my excess away. Like that. And I'm ready to sew section 4. So section 4 is a little piece of green fabric, because that's my sort of border fabric. So let's just get some, I have a nice little bit here, and we'll just cut a section for that. So say it may seem a bit wasteful, but it's always better to go bigger because it just makes life so much easier. So I'm going to once again stick the green to the back, and then I can just see it's definitely going to fit. Because although the green section is quite small, we've got to incorporate the seam allowance as well, so that makes it a bigger section. So that's why it's always a good idea to cut a bigger piece. So for section 4, once again, I'm going to start at the end and move down. So backwards and then forwards, and then backwards, and then I can use my wonderful scissors. Makes everything really nice and neat, and also I've got my knee lift in, which is just brilliant, so I don't need to take my hands off my work, just use my knee lift to raise the foot, release the tension, and it's really easy to take it off. So there, again, I can now fold back, give it a little press, and have a look at my design. So I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, so now I'm on to 5, which is this section here. And looking at my design, that's another green piece, so I'm going to add another green piece there. So I'm going to go 5, 6 and 7. So I hope you get the gist of what I'm doing. I'm sort of building up my layers, working my way around the design to get the finished panel, and I'm just going to get on with that and sew all those together. So I've sewed all my sections now, all my pieces are sewn together, and I'm going to trim it up because, you know, give it a neaten up. So that's what I'm going to do next. So that's section A finished, and you can see this is section A here on my design, and this is it stitched out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give it a press, and I'm going to work my way around the design and just complete all the other sections. Then we'll come back and I'll show you how I'm going to sew each section together to make up the whole butterfly. I've finished piecing all my sections together, all 5 sections for this half of the butterfly, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start joining them together. So the first thing I need to do is I need to join part C to part B. So I'm going to simply put these together, and I'm going to stitch along this line here to join that section together. Now if we come over to the machine, I've changed my foot. This is a 1/4 inch seam which I'm going to be sewing here, so I've put foot 97D on, and with the guide, because I want to just sew a 1/4 of an inch seam down here, so that foot's going to be really useful for that. I've also increased my stitch length to 2. I may need to go a bit longer because this is quite thick now, because we've got those layers of fabric and we've got our paper. I think I'm definitely going to need to increase my stitch length from what it is, so I'm going to see how that goes. But yeah, so now I'm just going to sew these two together to make that section of the wing. So I'm just going to check that it's all lining up. That looks pretty good. So now I'm going to sew section A to the joined up section B and C together. Trim that there. So that's that section. So those two now nicely joined together. And now I'm going to join section D to section E. That's that section. And then I'm going to join these two together. So now I'm just sewing the top wing to the bottom wing. So that's that section all joined together. Now I'm going to sew the 2 halves of the butterfly together to make a whole butterfly. Because this is going to be quite thick, I've increased my stitch length to, I think I might take it a bit further up to 2.15, just because I've got a lot of layers. So I'm going to join these together now. So I'm just going to get them nicely lined up. And there we go, that's the butterfly all done. So now all I need to do is take the backing off, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of sashing around the edge. I'm going to do this because I'm going to do the Spanish hem stitch down the edge, and it works better if you've got a nice flat even surface, so it's going to work well if I just put a little sashing around it. So I'm just sewing the edging on. I've got a stitch length of 2.55. I've moved my needle position over, and I'm going to align it up with the edge of the foot, just because I want to have about a 1/2 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, I'm just going to go and give that a little press. I've sewn the board around, and now I'm just going to attach the red fabric to the green, so we've got that central panel in the middle all finished, and then we can move on to the Spanish hem. I'll just do it to the bottom. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold the sides over and give them a good press and a starch, so they're ready to sew the yellow section on with the Spanish hem, so we've got a nice crisp edge. Okay, now we're going to move on to our second technique, which is using the Spanish hem stitch attachment. The Spanish hem attachment acts as a spacer and allows you to join 2 pieces of fabric together because you've got that spacer, you get a constant distance between the two bits of fabric, which you can then fill with these lovely lacy stitches. And there's, you know, lots of different designs you can use. This attachment's really versatile. You can use it on lots of different projects. So I'm using it on my bag, but you could use it on pillowcases to add, you know, a decorative edge. You could use it on shirts and skirts if you wanted to add, say, a ribbon trim round the end. You can use it on table runners. There's lots of different occasions where you might want to use this attachment. So what we're going to do is have a look at what you get in the box. So it comes in this lovely box, and we can just take the cover off and pull this out. So inside you get all the instructions that shows you how to use your attachment, and it also shows you some different stitch styles that it recommends. They have to go from one side to the other so it all holds together. Then we have inside the box, it comes with the spacers. So these are our cord guides. And these spacers or cord guides, you have two sets, one for a 9mm machine, the larger ones, and one for a 5mm machine. Now, you have two in each set. So a larger one is for thicker fabric. So if you have quite a solid, thick fabric, you can use the larger one. If you have a softer fabric, you can use the slightly smaller spacer, and I'm going to be using the smaller one because my fabric is fairly soft. Even though I've starched it and made sure I've got a nice crisp edge, because that's very important, I'm still going to go for the smaller one, so there's not so much tension, not so much pull on the fabric, and I get a nicer result. You also have your plate to attach the spacer onto your machine, and you get your screwdriver and your screw to hold it into place. Now what we need to do is we get our attachment, and it just clips on here. So what you do is, hope you see this, I just pop it into place, pop it down, and then I push it forward, and that snaps into place and that holds it firmly. So then I'm going to screw this down onto my machine, and that will hold it into place. Then I can butt my fabric either side of this guide, and that will give me a nice even gap all the way through. I'm going to change my stitch to one of the heirloom stitches. So I'm going to go into my decorative folder and to heirloom stitches, and I'm going to choose stitch 702. So that's perfect for this because as I say, it bridges the gap. It goes from one side to the other. Now this is a 9mm machine, and I'm going to use the spacer for the 9mm, so I can increase that right up to its maximum. So I'm getting a really nice wide gap there. In terms of thread, I'm going to be using a really pretty variegated thread on the top. This is in oranges and yellows, so that's going to coordinate really nicely with my design. And you're going to be able to see the bobbin thread as well. So I could use the same thread on the bottom, or I've got just a nice yellow underneath, which I think is going to work well. I've brought both my threads to the top, and I'm using a foot 20C. This is a foot you have to use with the hem stitch attachment, because it bridges the gap and goes around your the cord holder. So to attach the foot, I can just slide it up and pop it down so it fits into the screw holes on the side of the machine. So this is the same place that you'd use for your circular sewing attachment, and there are a few attachments that fit on this way. So it just pops into place, and then I just need to screw it down. So I'm just going to pop that screw in, tighten that up. So that's held nicely in place. Just make sure that that all fits nice and evenly. And now we're ready to start sewing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my two pieces of fabric, and I'll have them either side, and I'm going to start off with a knot just to anchor it in the corner, and then I'm going to feed my fabric through at a nice slow even pace, and just so it goes all the way through to the end. One thing you have to do is I'd make sure you keep your fingers near the foot, because you do need to guide it, make sure it's butting up against the attachment, And also just keep an eye and make sure those stitches are catching, so you're not getting any holes in your ladder design, the lacy design, as it goes down. To start, I'm going to make sure I hold my threads, and I'm just going to bring my needle down just to make sure it is catching that left hand piece of fabric. I've engaged the knot because I'm just going to do a little securing knot on that side before I start to sew, because it immediately swings to the right. So and I'm going to keep my fingers close to the needle and work my way down. So that's the front section finished. I've attached the 2 yellow panels. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to working on the back. So for the back section, I've changed machines because I wanted to show you this attachment on a machine that had a 5mm stitch width. So I've swapped over and we're on the B335. I've attached the attachment, it goes on in just the same way, but I've used the larger of the cord guides for the 5.5mm stitch machine, so I've changed the guide here, but it goes on exactly the same. So for this row of stitching, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use stitch 53, slightly different stitch. This is a really pretty stitch, but again it goes from side to side, so it's going to work well. So for that I need to select hash 53, and we've got the correct stitch. Now I want to make it a bit longer for this project, so I'm going to take my stitch length up to 2. I found that works better. Now what I really wanted to show you on this machine was that the fact that you can insert cords, so you can make really lovely designs with cords. I'm using a green cord, which is going to match my gorgeous green sparkly thread. I love a decorative thread, but you could use a contrasting cord. This is a perlé crochet cord, but you can use any cord you want, up to 2mm, so it does need to be fairly narrow. So to attach the cord, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop it on my knee lift. So I'm just going to pop it through the knee lift there, and that's going to hold that in place like that. And I'm going to thread up my nice green thread. I've already threaded my bobbin with some green thread in the bobbin, but now I'm going to thread up my top. Now because this is a metallic and it's a fairly thick thread, I've changed my needle, so I've now got a size 90 needle because I found that worked better with this thread. So making sure I've got my presser foot raised, I'm just going to thread up this lovely sparkly green. And I'm going to bring both my threads to the top, so I'm just going to bring my bobbin thread up. That's great. And now I'm also going to get my cord in position, so I'm just going to, I want it to be quite loose, so I want it to sort of have a length hanging down, so I've just taken quite a lot off, and then it just fits in this channel here, so I can go through to the back and round under the foot, and then I can just lay it in this channel here and it will just lay there. I'm going to pull quite a lot through to the back just so it sort of holds it in place. So I've got all my threads up to the top and I've got my cord fed through the guide. So now, as we've done before, I can just get my 2 pieces of fabric. So we've got one red and one green. I'm just going to go line them up at the top, and using my knee lift I can just keep my hands on my work and lower my presser foot down. So now everything's trapped, and when I start I want to hold all my threads and my cord so they don't come, so they don't jump out. And I'm just going to check it's on its maximum width, and again just move those in. Now the way this stitch forms, it has to do one stitch before it catches the fabric, but it's gone into the fabric now. So as I did before, now I'm just going to work my way down, keeping an eye on that cord, making sure I've got plenty of slack so it doesn't get caught. One of the things I just wanted to say is, if you find that when you get to the end your pieces of fabric aren't even, you know, one's creeped forward more than the other, then what you can do is put a bit of stabilizer behind them. Then that will keep them nice and flat, and you won't get that problem. Another thing you could look out for is you can put markers on your fabric as you go down, and that will just give you a guide to make sure both fabrics are feeding through at an even rate. Because with my fabric here, I found that the green is slightly stiffer than the red, so that may affect the way the fabric feeds through, but it's all trial and error, and you have to, you know, work out how your fabric reacts. But as I say, we're just going to sew down with this lovely decorative stitch, trapping the cord in, which gives it another extra element. For the next section, I'm just going to add some yellow onto some red for the next panel, and I've changed my threads over, so I've got a yellow cord and I've got some gold sparkly thread and I've got some yellow thread in my bobbin. I've changed my stitch, I'm using stitch 19, and I've increased my stitch length here. And yeah, we're just going to sew down as we've done before. I've had to increase the width of this stitch because it wasn't quite a 5.5mm stitch width, so I've taken that up to the maximum. And once again, I'm going to hold all my threads when I start and just make sure that I keep my fabrics nice and straight and in line, and make sure my stitches are catching. So we're going to sew our last section on, which is going to be the green to the yellow. Now this is actually take 2 of me trying to do this, because when I did it before I didn't have any stabilizer behind these two, and I was finding I was getting the green was ending up being much shorter than the yellow. So what I've done this time is I've reduced the length of the stitch. I did have it on 2.5, I've taken it down to 2 with my length. We're using stitch 4 by the way. And I've put some little strips of stabilizer, I've pinned them behind each of the colour just to give it a bit more body. So when I'm sewing down and going from one side to the other, hopefully I won't get, when I reach the end they'll be the same length. So we're going to experiment with that now. So I've got my cord in, again I'm just going to start by holding all my threads, and we'll work our way down and keep an eye on the length. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop here and just see how we're doing. A little bit out, but not as bad as it was, so we'll carry on. So that's the back section finished, and now we're going to move on to take a look at the lining. So for the lining, I've got this really snazzy sparkly oilcloth. So this is going to be great when I turn the bag inside out, because I want to sit on it. Then I've got this nice white clean surface, and I thought I'd make it slightly padded so you know it's comfy when I'm sitting in the park. So what I've done is I've sprayed 505 sprayed just some normal wadding onto the back, and I've just stitched it down in a diagonal pattern just to give it a bit of texture and to keep the wadding into place. So that's the next thing we're going to do. Because I'm going to be working on this vinyl, I'm using foot 52, which is the non-stick foot. It's got that nice coating so it doesn't stick to the vinyl. And because I want to sew parallel rows, I'm using my my seam guide here. So that slides into the back of the foot, don't know if you can see that there, and then you just tighten it up with the screw. Often you'll find these screws, they may have fallen out, and you think, what do I need that for? Well, this is what it's used for. It's used to hold this guide in. So I just used my my sew table just to get that the right distance. I'm going for a 1.5 inch gap. So I've tightened that in, and I can just pop that on, and I'm going to put my thread, just pop my thread through the foot. This foot doesn't have a slit in it, so I'm just going to feed that through. And then I'm going to line up the row I've already done with my guide and keep that level, and then just stitch down. Now because I'm using a vinyl, I'm working on a vinyl and it's quite thick, I've increased my stitch length to 3. But I'm just going to sew down, I'm just going to do all my rows all the way across, so I've got my padded lining finished. And also I've swapped back to my B480 because it's a larger machine, giving me more room to work on. So I'm just going to sew down. So because I'm using my foot 52, it's gliding through and getting the correct stitch length. It's not sticking at all. And I just need to focus on keeping that guide lined up with the row I've already done. Our last row, and then that's the inner seat pad all finished. So I've got this great webbing for my handles in this lovely rainbow colour, so I was really pleased with that. I've cut it to size, but I'm finding that it's fraying quite a lot at the ends. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my foot 2A, my overlock foot, and stitch 3. And I'm just going to stitch over the edge just to neaten that up so it doesn't continue to fray. So I'm lining up the edge of the edge of the handle with the edge of the foot, and I'm just going to stitch down. So this is just going to stop it from fraying. Just neaten it up. So I can just trim that. I'm just going to trim away this little frayed section. So I'm just going to do all my ends. Great, so that's that all neatened up. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to join the lining with the front, and I need to insert my handles as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and pin that all together, get that ready, and then I'll come back to the machine and just sew that down. So the next stage is to tack down the handles. I'm not going to use the built-in tacking stitch on this machine for this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase my stitch length up to 6, so I've got a nice long stitch. It doesn't have to be as long as a normal tacking stitch, because I'm really just holding them into place. Okay. So now I'm going to join the front to the lining, and I've got my handles basted in the middle. And I've changed over to my walking foot because I'm sewing my top, which is a cotton, onto the vinyl, which can be quite slippy. So I think that will really help having that extra feed from the top there, and I've pinned it really well to try and stop it moving around. I'm going to use just a normal stitch length. I want a 1 centimetre seam allowance, so I've just moved my needle over slightly, and I'm going to line it up with the edge of the foot. So yeah, we're just going to attach the top to the bottom. Great, now I'm going to go on and do the other side. So that's the front sewn to the inside and the back sewn to the inside as well. So now what I'm going to do is join them together, and I'm going to sew all the way round to make my bag up. What I've done is I've just marked a gap at the bottom, so I'm not going to sew between these two markers because that's where I'm going to turn it through. So I'm just going to pin all that together and then sew around the edge, and then we're nearly done. Okay, so I'm all pinned together, and I'm just going to sew around the edge. Going to set needle down so I can pivot at the corner. So I've gone all the way around now, so what I'm going to do is turn it inside out, and then I'll close this seam. So that's the next step. Now all I need to do is close up that hole at the bottom where I turned my bag through. Because I'm working on my oilcloth again, I'm using my foot 52, and I've changed my thread to red thread, so you're not going to be able to see it. And this is really thick with all the layers, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower my foot pressure just a little bit, so it's not going to get stuck underneath. So what I'm going to do is just sew down and close that gap up. Great, so that's it all closed up. All I need to do is push it inside, and then that's us done. So that's our project finished for today. I hope you enjoyed learning about the foundation paper piecing and the Spanish hem stitch attachment. I think it's turned out to be a really attractive bag, and I'm looking forward to using it. I can now go off to the park and sit on the grass without fear. So yeah, we're all done. Thank you very much for watching.